Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Omni Athlete. You believe that you can be more, and so do we. We created this show and company to do it with you by empowering your performance with the wisdom and techniques of the world's highest achieving mind, body, and spirit competitors. Okay, so today's guest is a former Brown University baseball player turned professionally certified coach to resilient, high performing leaders and teams. His journey down the path of integrating the tribal and cultural elements that support developing authentic leaders began as the result of a chance yoga class that hit him like a bolt of lightning, leaving him confused and angry as to why it took so long for him to find this connection between mind, body, and spirit. Determined to help develop more values-driven, high-performing leaders, he eventually returned to Brown University to explore mindful leadership development, spent 2 years working for a former U.S. Olympic leadership and performance coach, and completed Georgetown's renowned leadership coaching certification program. Since that point, he's brought his breadth of research and real-world leadership experience into Fortune 500 companies, foundations, government organizations, educational institutions, and athletic organizations, all with the supreme focus of laying the tracks for leaders to cultivate their rhino mind and own how they show up in the world. It's my pleasure to introduce to Omni Athlete, Todd Iarussi. Welcome to the show, Todd.
Wow, thanks so much for that, Josh. That was a beautiful intro. I'm going to have to go back and review that and grab some of that language from my own website. So I appreciate it.
Good. It was fun, man. Preparing for this interview, Todd, was really fun for me because it was different. Because I know your focus is both very broad within this context of leadership, but also very specific in how we show up authentically and how we develop cultures that really breed individual and team success.
Mm-hmm.
I started pulling from some really interesting places, and the topic that I want to start us off with is what your experience with shame has been as both an athlete and then as a coach, how you've seen that show up for leaders in sport or just in general.
I love that question, and so topical, especially with Brene Brown's new book, right, about leadership. I've definitely never been asked that before as it relates to my experience as an athlete, but I would have to say that shame was probably the predominant consciousness operating. So yeah. I feel like I had a successful career, right? I got to start all 4 years. It was, captain of the team, amazing experience. But I did not have the space to feel real joy in that experience, even after having a little bit of experience in it at the college level. It always felt like a struggle against my mind. I didn't know you could work with the mind at that time. That was, 97 was my first year in college. So for me, I was working so much with my body on a strict diet, hitting, running, lifting constantly. My whole life was geared towards being the best baseball player I could be. And this whole world of mind and spirit was like a void. I didn't know I could do anything about that. So I was always concerned with results. So every at bat, I would feel that spotlight shift to me when that last person in front of me was out. I could feel a spotlight and start to wonder, am I going to get a hit? I need to get a hit. We need a hit. It's big for it. All that stuff was in my mind all the time. I have no idea how I got anything done. So, and then a lot of anger, confusion, shame if things didn't go well. And I'm so happy that there's a conversation about that now, because I think that there's so much suffering that we can avoid individually and collectively when we're able to have the conversation and can have it skillfully. So it was a big part of my life back then for sure.
So as you kind of fast forward then, I think a lot of us as athletes, right, we deal, and I think shame and anger, if I can grab both of those, I think they show up in different ways for us as athletes, both for male and female athletes, right? Yeah. And so I guess actually the first question is, when you work with, whether it's an athlete or just a leader in general, are there kind of indications to you that suffering may be below the surface for somebody that they're either trying to avoid or haven't really, allowed to emerge yet?
Yeah, well, I mean, as Brene talks about, like shame can be complicated and often has to do with our history and our cultural download, family history. I think there's a lot that goes into it. As a coach, I really am much more forward looking So what do we want to create? What's possible here? Why are we talking? Okay, where are things right now? And what are some things we can start to experiment with and get curious about to close that gap between where you are and where you want to go and the impact that you have on others? And then shame will inevitably, using sometimes different language, will pop up in the course of getting really honest and having those coaching conversations. And sometimes I'll even talk about family. I'll just say, tell me your story. Like, what's your story up until now? And let's hear that. And in telling their story, sometimes those elements that they learned at a younger age and the way they relate to themselves, let alone relate to others, will start to reveal, and the source of that will come up. But shame, I don't often name it in that way. They'll usually name it in that way or some other way related. And it absolutely is a topic that I think is more ubiquitous with high-level leaders than we realize, and really successful people.
Yeah, there's this really interesting dynamic around anger too for athletes, and I think a lot of times the right way to process anger and the right way to both acknowledge, there's this level of self-honesty we want to have and say, hey, I'm feeling angry about this. And then there's this awareness that we may have as to, we don't want to send that at somebody, right? We don't want to we don't want to send it at a person, a teammate, a friend, whoever, a coach. So there's this kind of tension that we see evolving between learning how to be skillful with how you feel it and communicate it without, projecting or sending it out to somebody.
Absolutely. Yeah. Most of my work with leaders is first and foremost about their relationship to themselves. Let's start there, because usually how you treat yourself is going to be related to how you treat other people. Yeah. So let's start to get out that dialogue that's running through your head all the time. Yeah. And what happens when things don't go well? What do you say to yourself in those circumstances? Like questions like that will start to reveal. And then oftentimes that self-compassion work, self-awareness work, self-regulation work will then help to open up the door to, okay, how do we bring that out into the way you interact with others in this circumstance? Or we know that this triggers you. Let's talk about how you can now respond to that with these emotional intelligence skills. So it's a process, but I think, I don't know if I'd go as far to say there's a limit to the quality of relationship you can have as relates to yourself, but it could be. I don't know. I've seen a lot of evidence to that case.
One of the things that I heard you mention in one of your podcasts was this notion that, as leaders, but I think it's true really as individuals, when we have these points in life where we put our stake in the ground and we say, okay, this is what we're about. This is how we want to show up in the world. This is the world that we want to live in. The world then goes about self-organizing in a lot of ways to allow that to take shape. And I was curious to know from you, one, what has helped shape that view for you? And, how do we, this is such a giant question, but how do we get honest in that way?
Yeah. Wow, that's a great question. I could feel a little emotion come up as you said that, because it's the journey of values is such a deeply personal journey. And I think once you start to explore the world of what are my values and how am I honoring those in as kind a way as possible, it's easy to be harsh or kind of power over with yourself in that way. But I started to really get curious. I mean, the journey started really with that first yoga class opened things up. Of course, after a tough breakup, when else are you going to be receptive? When else was I going to be receptive to any growth or change? And I was about 24 and went to that first class, and that opened up that world for me of, oh, you can work with these thoughts and feelings and emotions. And then read my first book about Buddhism, which was my first deep dive, I feel, into values work. I felt like that was, let's just not talk about values, let's actually practice those. And it was a book about Zen, so even more practice oriented than some of the others. So what do these values of compassion actually, how are you compassionate right now? And I read that book. It was called Zen Dawn in the West by a guy named Roshi Philip Kapleau, who started the Rochester Zen Center. It was an influential 60s Zen center and still is in that region and around the world. And that book was so impactful. I read it I was on a flight and they were like, do you want anything to drink, peanuts? And I couldn't even hear anybody talking. I just was like this on my first flight to California. And And so I landed and finished the book, and I must have looked like a crazy person. If there was video of me coming off that plane, I probably looked like a zombie. And I said, I'm not going to eat meat anymore. That's the first compassionate. If you talk about compassion in action, I know that animals suffer in this process in some way. And so that's the first. That's something I can change right now. It might take me a long time to become awakened in the way this book is explaining it, but I can do this right now. And I didn't eat a piece of meat for 12 years after that moment. And that started me on a journey of how do I integrate these practices that I'm reading about, this yoga? What is that? What part does that cover? Okay, Zen, where does that come into this piece? Like, how do I bring that into the social context? So that started that trajectory for me of those questions. And then I got to Mindful Warrior, and that's where I did some really specific work around values and practice. So we had 5 core values with that company that we were using for these mindful leadership programs for adults and for students in independent schools and business organizations as well. And safety, trust, respect, belonging, and inclusion were those 5 values. And as a facilitator in that, I had to wonder immediately, how am I honoring those values and practices? And that was around 2013, 14. And that was life-changing for me. The things that I've done since then, I could trace to starting to get curious about values in practice. So I don't drink alcohol anymore at all. I did a year of celibacy. After that, I did a year of no dates, no drinks. Just because I felt so accountable in that vulnerable space to really have my quote unquote stake in the ground and be someone that can be deeply trusted in the most vulnerable moments. So that journey of what is it really like to live with these values, that's at the core of who I am at this point. And now I feel like I have that stake in the ground. So when I work with a leader, I feel in my integrity when I'm working with someone and doing that deep work. So yeah.
That's incredible. And what comes up for me is this question of like, why is it so maybe challenging or even just not, you kind of alluded to this, right? We talk about values, but so often, and I think in a sports context, it shows up in more abstract than it does in tangible ways or in, here's how we literally act these values out, and not just in the context of the game, but here's how we live with these values and this idea that it's not separate. Why is that separation there? And why do you think it's so challenging at times to take that abstract down into, okay, am I actually living this right now?
I think it's part of a bigger awakening that's happening just in organizational development and coaching consciousness and all of the evidence base that's accumulating now in different areas related to this. So I think it's all now starting to happen with more rigor and skill and interest. And I think there's also now a business case for living values. And I think Adam Grant's done some great work around the both and of having amazing, healthy cultures that also get better results and profit. So I think it's now starting to happen. I think what makes it hard is habits.
Yeah.
Habit change is a big business. That's a multi-billion-dollar business. And it's hard to change habits, especially when we grew up in a culture that did things differently or didn't think in that way. So I have the book Atomic Habits on my desk right now. I just got in the mail. So I'm in the business of habit change. It's a big part of what I do. And so I think that's what makes it challenging. And even when a leader decides this is important, it's still hard to make it happen. So there's the awareness of, oh, this is important. And that's a leap in its own. And then, okay, this is important. How do we do this? And then there's, how do we check up on that this is happening in a way that honors what we're trying to create here? So each of those steps has their own challenge associated. So to get towards the end of that, where you really have an organization, a team that's living values, that's committed, stake in the ground to those values, they see the deep why in it, how it relates to their goals. And then there's also a process for checking up on the process and evolving it. Like that's what I consider like a gold standard right now. And that's probably relatively rare in the world of sports and business for that matter, but it is happening. There's places where it's happening.
So there's a thread of self-organization right there that I want to pull on, but then there's also this notion so habits are really interesting because I think the spiritual nature of peak performance, right, is to be in the present moment.
Mm-hmm.
And to be in the present moment requires, not just this activation and experience of our flow state, but it just truly requires this willingness to be uncertain, to be in that uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a tension, it feels like, there between habits and uncertainty, and the ability to say, okay, these are the habits that I have, without letting them become just mechanistic and just, I'm going through the motion, and lose that ability to use the habit to access flow and to access that present moment. What is that tension like for you, and how do you help people work through it?
Yeah. It's interesting. I'm working a lot more with what you can call tension arcs or polarities. The word polarities are becoming a big thing in the coaching world, and Georgetown talks a lot about that. The one that just popped up as you were talking is Jocko Willink's big one: discipline equals freedom. Right? Like, how are those two related? If I'm being disciplined, how am I free? And you can see, I think there's that relationship for me. When I'm disciplined, I do have more. I feel like I'm more free in my life to feel joy, to drop into the flow. An example of that is the biggest thing that's been habit changing for me that's freed me up. So I'm looking outside right now. I'm in Providence, Rhode Island. It's freezing outside. It was 9 degrees the other day. I take in the morning. The shower's warm for the first few minutes. At the end of every shower, except for my bedtime shower, last minute is cold, freezing cold, no matter what the temperature is outside. And before I turn that handle, I say, make the hard choice. So I say, make the hard choice, turn the handle. And I try to get in that water and find comfort in the discomfort while I'm doing that. That's a discipline. That doesn't sound super free. That sounds really unpleasant for a lot of people. So if I were to go out and say that in this shared space out here, people would be like, oh my goodness, that sounds horrible. What that does is give me the freedom to make values-driven choices all day. It has a direct impact. So I'm free to make choices that bring me more joy, bring me more space, give me a better chance to be in the flow, honor my values. So that's just my simplest example of how those two things go together. But that's been life-changing for me, that practice. It's been about a year. I do it every day. Never miss a day.
So one of the topics that we have been really focused on lately is self-love, and the ability to, and I think self-love connects to values, and it connects to that sense of wholeness, right? And really being authentic in how you show up. And at times it is challenging to pull apart discipline and self-love, right? What is the notion of grit that at times can be detrimental to that sense of wholeness, and what is the notion of grit that is what you just described, which is giving yourself that ability and permission and reminder that you're capable of making those choices that align with who you want to be. That at times it seems like it's hard for us to navigate as athletes.
I agree, and I'm glad you asked a follow-up, because what also comes to mind related to the first question, meditation, right? That's discipline and freedom in action. That's attention in and of itself, inherent in the practice. You're sitting there. So there's things you have to do to set up the container to have that practice. So there's a disciplined element to it. There's a posture to it. There's a way you hold your body. There's a certain attentional focus, a way you work with your awareness in relation to that. But you get to experience a freedom in that sometimes that you might not experience otherwise, that you can pull out into your life. So I'm now, to be in the not knowing, in tensions, like, you're going to have to deal with tensions. It's a part of the workplace. It's a part of sports, is being in some type of tension arc or polarity. And so I think the most important thing is to build the capacity to be in the not knowing and the tension, quote unquote, without having to leap or fill a quiet space or be comfortable in silence, or to know, like, okay, we don't have an answer now, but let's stay curious about it and stay close to it, and let's see what happens. So I think it's a constant toggle between that discipline and that freedom, or whatever arc you're talking about. I think the important thing for athletes and people in business is to build the capacity to be in tension and be in not knowing, because that'll open up all kinds of space and freedom for you.
What do you mean by that? Because what do you mean by that?
By which part?
By the capacity.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's some of the emotional intelligence capacities are the simplest way to think about it. So can I hold my attention somewhere when I put it there?
Hmm.
That's a capacity. Am I reactive to things when things pop up? It's like poking me. Do I poke right back, or do I have some space to choose a response to there? So that self-regulation element of it. Like those two are foundational for me. So that's self-awareness and self-regulation and self-compassion as well. Do I have the space when something doesn't go well to have positive self-talk and be kind to myself and be curious? I think like the default of growth mindset, that openness, curiosity element is also a way that helps to be in the tension. Like if you're curious, you don't need an answer right here, right now. Like committing to curiosity puts you in a not knowing beginner's mind space. So I think like understanding the emotional intelligence capacity element of it and the mindset element of it, and then how all that relates to the body as well. Like that's why the cold shower is so helpful for me. Like it's not just me mentally saying make the hard choice.
Right.
Like I feel the hard choice in my whole mind, body, spirit, soul, preference, like everything is tied into that. And so really working the body in has been helpful for me for habit change and understanding that tension and being in, like I'm literally choosing to be in the tension in that moment. So I think meditation and that and yoga have been, yoga is also another embodied example of discipline and freedom in practice in every moment in that flow. And I was doing yoga this morning. Like when I'm doing a difficult balancing pose, like that's a tension. I'm in the tension and in the not knowing of that moment and working my awareness and those other capacities. So I think those are my three core physical practices for working on that. Mental, physical, spiritual, all of it.
Yeah. Yeah. So can you reflect on a moment as an athlete where that ability to be curious in the uncertainty or that ability to be curious in the tension, either where you reflect and go, oh, this was an example of where that would have been really powerful for me, or when it did show up and what performance felt like? Because I think the tangible outcome and embodiment of what that practice looks like for an athlete is sometimes hard to grab onto.
Yeah. My best example, I could reflect back on what it might have felt like. My level of curiosity, I'm not sure if it would fit under this book right here on the table like that I had back then. It wasn't even I didn't even know it was possible to like, I wonder what's going to happen here. Like that orientation, I was like, this needs to happen here was my orientation. But the beautiful thing is I started playing really aggressive pickup basketball in the last few years again. And my number one sport until I was a sophomore in high school was basketball, until I unfortunately stopped growing and didn't really have the ability to play at a higher level. But so I'll take you to what it was like and what it's like now. Yeah. I had my first real panic attacks my sophomore year in high school when I made the varsity team on a big Division I high school. Yeah. And all of a sudden, I was thrust into a starting role as a point guard in a really good league as a sophomore. And the thing with basketball, part of the reason I think it's so popular now, and the NBA is so far and away number one sport as far as fan engagement and just its growth trajectory and love. I was in front of all my peers as an underclassman. So Friday night, crazy noise, energy. I'm in a tank top and short shorts, and all of my peers are up in the stands there. And the first time I got put in, I literally, all the spit went from my mouth, and like I could feel the blood like leave my face and limbs and like go to the center. And I was like, I don't know how I'm even going to dribble right now. Like I don't think I can do anything right now. And all of a sudden I'm out there and the ball's getting passed to me, and here I go against these great defenders, and I did not perform at all. And that was the first time I realized, like, oh my goodness, like I'm not sure I can do this anymore. And so I switched to baseball. I left basketball and said, if I'm going to be a college athlete, this is what I need to focus on. But that I always wanted to redeem basketball. I just feel like I was so far from my potential. So I started playing again. And now with all these capacities, I've actually experienced flow states playing basketball. Yeah. Like there's so much, like I want to start crying. I have so much joy being in the flow with this team and being aware of where I am and where I fit and what's our best shot, and playing defense, and like how can we stifle flow on D, but flow together as defenders. How do we flow and find our best shot on offense? I'm playing with the same people every week, so we're getting to know each other's games. And the joy I feel from that basketball every week was beyond anything I've ever experienced. And I was always working with my mind. I could feel that grab of, oh, this is a big shot. You need to make this shot. Big possession. Oh, no, let that go. Just drop back in and be here and feel the game is what I would just feel the game is what I'd take a breath, feel the game. Unfortunately, I tore my ACL a month ago playing basketball. And I was playing, so my girlfriend would be dying listening to this because I'm playing in an old man's Jewish community center pickup game. I'm making this sound like this is like retired NBA players. But it's the perfect level for it's that flow of it's just enough for that skill level to feel that.
Yeah.
I was so good for 2 hours that day. And the joy was so high with my teammates and myself. Honestly, the injury was worth having that peak experience and the 9-month recovery. Like that's how it actually feels, that level of joy.
So that's an incredible experience to reference because I feel like so many of us almost exclusively experience injuries as a lack, right? And that's not to say that that's not part of what you're experiencing, but the fact that you can sit there and say, hey, this was worth it because of everything I was feeling indicates that level of connection and flow with what you were doing, right? And with that experience you were having. And what's really cool for me, and I hope for you guys listening, you can grab onto this, whatever level of competition you're at, that is an option for you, right? Like you have that ability to play with such freedom and joy that even when something doesn't go the way you want it to or intended it to, it can be whether it's trade-off is the right word or whether it's just another experience on that path that doesn't lessen the joy you felt.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And as you're saying that, what came up is, baseball is a team sport, but it's very individual and it's in the action of it. And basketball was my first love growing up. Like Michael Jordan, I had the new Jordans every year. Like it was, and Larry Bird was my basketball hero. At the time I grew up in Boston, so to go to those games and see the team play, like that was embedded in me early. It's like, oh, he's not just trying to be great for himself. Like he's trying to do something bigger than him in the way he plays. Yeah. And so that was so much of the joy for me recently is this isn't just about me. I've played golf rounds where I feel like I got into a flow state solo out there playing by myself. Yeah. And there's a joy in that. But next level for me is feeling that in a flow with others. I think that's what we're hardwired for. That's the tribal part you mentioned earlier. So to feel like we're a tribe working together to find our best shot or our best play or whatever it is, like that was so much of that joy for me. So I encourage people out there, like, if you aren't experiencing that deep joy with others, like what do you need to ask of yourself and maybe the others on your team that might help move you in that direction together? Because I think the deepest joy you're going to find is in that connection. Even if you're doing archery or downhill skiing and you're doing a solo sport, you are on some type of team. So how can you support each other in that experience of flow? So
one of the challenging, Todd, this is really exciting because the things that are sparking right now are not at all related to what I was anticipating. So it's cool. There's this tension where, or maybe just a place of learning for a lot of us as athletes when we feel, number one, to recognize when we're not feeling that joy, right? So one of the recurring themes that we've seen is that for athletes at all levels of competition, one of the key indicators that a transition is coming is that they lose touch with that joy, right? So for whatever reason, the sport is no longer about maybe what drew them to it and what kept them in it working hard. It becomes about the money, becomes about the time, who they think they're supposed to be in relation to their sport, any number of things. And what often happens, I think, in life for a lot of us is rather than, number one, having that awareness, and then number two, having that courage to ask of our team what's needed, we often turn away. We kind of maybe presume that it is just the way it is. And what you're sharing and indicating is such a powerful, different way, a third way maybe, or just another option to say, no, we can ask of each other things to make us better so we don't have to turn away.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, I love, you must know Simon Sinek, like
Sure.
the why. There's an image in his book, Leaders Eat, I think it's Leaders Eat Last, where it's a circle of people and they're all locked in arms and they're on a team. And you don't want to have to, you don't want to be looking over your shoulder at possible attacks from those that are around you. Like you want to be arms locked, facing outward towards the competition, quote unquote. But that if there is something to deal with, and I think I'm adding this part, I don't know if you wrote about it, you want to turn in and say, okay, let's almost like council circle style, like, okay, let's talk about what, let's resolve whatever this break was in the circle of trust so that we can then turn around again and lock arms. So I think that takes that's why I don't work directly with college or high school athletes as much anymore. I work with their coaches. I work with the administrators to help create the capacity and that culture for those students, pro athletes, to know that they have someone to turn to that's caretaking the overall culture and experience, that they can go to that person and partner and say, hey, I want to go talk to this person on the team, or I want to talk to the team. Like, what are you seeing? And to collaborate on a best approach for an individual or the team until you have that deep trust built with the members where they can then go to each other. So that's why I care about leaders. Like, it's leaders that are supposed to be helping people create that capacity and that intention and see the value in being able to have those kind of conversations with each other.
And do you think is one of the characteristics, and I think everybody has the capacity for leadership, and maybe one of the characteristics that in an athletic context is not always talked about, but really does affect somebody's ability to lead, and maybe why someone may step into those roles or emerge in those roles, is the ability to feel that conflict, or to feel that sometimes it's in our body, right? We get this sense that something just isn't, it's a sense, right? It's not necessarily an intellectual thought yet. Yeah. Is that one of the characteristics that you see among those leaders who have the ability to either cultivate those capacities or bring them to bear to work through conflict, to bring the team together, to rally everybody?
Absolutely. I think the body, you'll probably resonate with this. I think the body is the most underutilized resource in leadership. Honestly, it has so much information. We talk about, gut feeling, intuition is something that we talk about. That's trainable. You can train that and help bring a voice to the body. It's a core coaching competency to be coaching using the body. So I'll ask a leader, what does your body have to say about that? There's always an answer. I've never heard nothing from that question. And then it usually sparks a pretty interesting conversation. And then I usually start every coaching session that I do with leaders with mindfulness. We'll sit and we'll just bring our attention to our body, the space, the breath, and sit in that. So to start to tap into that feeling and that awareness right away, to kick the session off with that, and then to be referencing it. Or for me, part of my job is to notice when someone shifts in their seat or changes their posture in some way. And I say, what did you notice that just happened? What's going on there? And then they'll bring voice to that change or that shift, which is usually related to a thought that just popped up or a fear. So I think the body is this, athletes use their body all the time, but it doesn't mean they're training that level of intuition consciously.
Right.
It's often done at an unconscious level, but from a leadership standpoint, you can do it consciously. And that, I feel, is what makes the sport, one thing that can make sports more transferable. Those lessons learned, you can bring those out into anything you do after sport when you start to bring consciousness to that information that comes to you in all kinds of ways.
So in some ways, it's like when we use the word consciousness in the context of sport, it can be used at different layers and levels. And one of those ways is just that level of awareness to what your body's doing when you're not playing, right? Or what your body may tell you in relation to what you're thinking or feeling, versus just the, how do I move and run faster, get bigger, stronger, right? Jump higher. Like, there's this other level that a lot of times we separate.
Yeah, it's now catching up in college sports. My partner's a head coach at the college level, and I think her players every day have an app where they check in on their body. How's your body doing today? There's some version of that. I can't remember what the exact terminology is, but it's mentally, how you feeling, tiredness, how you feeling, physically, how are you feeling, to start to, they're not necessarily asking it to train that thing that's transferable, but in doing that, it makes it transferable for them. They start to practice listening to their body.
And so if we circle back now to this idea of culture, right? And one of the elements of culture that just selfishly I'm fascinated by because it's what we want to do here at Omni, but it's also something in sport that I think maybe is underutilized or is not necessarily yet made its way, is this notion of self-organization and the ability for on a just a simple level for us to really allow everybody to bring their fullest skill sets to bear, whether it's in a game, a practice, a team meeting. What have you seen as you work with leaders and help shape and steward those cultures? What allows somebody to show up authentically in that space?
The leader or support for the team around them?
I think both, but let's say support for the team around them first.
Yeah, I mean, that then requires of the leader. A lot of what I work on with leaders is to start to help them with that coaching consciousness for them to start to be a coach in that role. So I think traditionally we're coming out of a command and control run in the business world. And, certainly I think in the sports world too, of the person in command, the authority figure telling you what you need to do and noticing what you're not doing and then correcting or fixing you in some way. And we're now entering that phase. And some of the great coaches have been doing this for a long time, but isn't necessarily a part of the culture, is for that leader to be curious. Hey, what do you think about that? Like, how are you feeling? Like, do you have any ideas related to this? And when that leader starts to know when it's time to put that coach hat on or that facilitator hat on and say, let's tap into the wisdom of this room. Like, what's here in this room right now? What ideas do people have? Like, that's inclusion in practice, right? It's some of the other values too, but especially inclusion. Like when I interviewed that Navy SEAL, Jeff Eggers, who was Obama's national security advisor, Obama used to do that. Like he'd be in the room and he'd call on the aide in the back, like typing something with the luggage of the person next to them that's not even a part of the meeting. He'd say, what do you think about, like, do you have any ideas? And let's just get best. It's not about me. It's not about them. Let's search for best idea in the room because people's lives are on the line in that case, or people's well-being's on the line in other cases, or our ability to win is on the line. So there's some great books about this. I love the book Multipliers for this, like talking about tapping into the native intelligence of all the people around you. So I think if there's one key job for leaders, it's to try to tap into that intelligence and that intuition and that wisdom of the people around you and to create the container for that. Like that, to me, if you can do that, you're going to be as good as you can be as a team.
So then the interesting question that comes up for me is the balance between, as a leader, when you leverage that or really create the container for that wisdom to emerge and to become part of that shared pool of meaning, what allows you then to understand when to trust what your internal compass is saying or what your, the vision you have? One of the most incredible statistics I've heard recently, Todd, is that 80% so when we make a decision or our perception of the world, 80% of that perception is already in our head, right? The data, 20% of the data that, affects how we see the world is coming from outside, but most of it's already there. Mm-hmm. So as a leader, what's that balance of, okay, I'm tapping into the wisdom of the room. How do I know when to leverage that wisdom versus to leverage what I'm seeing if they're at odds?
Yeah, that's a good question. I talk about that with leaders for sure. Setting the ground rules, like letting people know that, I think ahead of time, like just how do we make decisions together?
Yeah.
Okay, if we're not sure, does my vote, some leaders will say like, okay, my vote's going to be the final vote and I'm going to get as much information as I can. And then this is how I'm going to make that decision at the end of the day. So I think you do as much as you can up front about those kind of moments. And then you use those capacities we mentioned earlier, that be in the tension and not knowing capacities, to know as a leader, is this time for me to be a director? Is this time for me to be a consultant? Is this coach time? Is this facilitator time? Like to be able to put those different hats on and to know that that's even possible and potentially helpful for leaders. Like that's what a lot of my conversations with leaders are about in coaching sessions, is to have the capacity to do that. And then to debrief instances where they'll say, I made this decision and I don't really think I had the full consensus of the group, or people were quiet and we felt a little rushed. And I really wish I had been a little bit more of a coach or tabled that decision for a little bit later. We didn't really need it then. So being able to debrief those kinds of things are really helpful for leaders to develop that capacity. So that's where, like, where do coaches fit in all this? Like, that's where we fit. We're not the quote unquote sports coach in that instance. We're not on the team. We're an outside person that someone can go to debrief these kind of experiences, to learn and to create new intentions to bring out into the space, to continue that learning journey for these performance elements of work or sports, whatever it is.
Todd, this has been energizing. Wow. This is awesome. Before I ask my final question, where can these guys go to connect with you online?
Absolutely. So rhinomind.com, my company's Rhinomind Coaching. So rhinomind.com is the website. I'm on Twitter at Rhinomind, and then my podcast can be found on wherever you get your podcasts, or on my website, Rhinomind Coaching Podcast. I interview leaders and performers from all different fields and have conversations oftentimes not too dissimilar from this one. But I'm in the other seat. I'm the one asking those curious questions like you've been asking. So it's been a real pleasure to just sit back and have someone else hold the space and ask the questions. So I've really appreciated that.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Todd. This has been, really energizing. So this podcast is called Omni Athlete because we want to understand what it takes to become the ultimate mind, body, and spirit competitor. The final question is, what does being an Omni Athlete mean to you?
Well, it brings up another tension. Competition and cooperation, I think, are a tension that we're all thinking about right now and talking about. Many of us in the coaching world are talking about when it relates to working with business leaders, but I think in sports as well. And so I would say being an Omni Athlete is about being integrated. It's about having the capacity to be in the tension. And it's about discovering your deeper why of what is worth it for you to put your stake in the ground around, and to make hard choices around, to become someone that can caretake not just themselves, but more and more people around them as they grow and learn and develop as a leader and as a person. So that's what being an Omni Athlete. That's the Omni Athlete I hope to be, and I hope some of you out there want to be some version of that as well.
Wow. Thank you, Todd, for being on the show. Wow. Guys, go check out Todd's work. Go dive deep into his world and check out his podcast, the content he's producing. There is this, sometimes when we think about leadership as athletes, we think about it in this really distinct box. And one of the things that is so incredible about the work Todd does, and you'll hear this in the conversations he has, in the way that he frames and shows and builds these different bridges and containers, leadership is a very fluid and dynamic and really energizing process to step into when you recognize that it doesn't have to just be about mind or body or spirit. And Todd brings those together in the work that he does and the people that he brings in front of you to connect with and share. So go do everything you can to learn and get connected with the work he's doing. And until next time, guys, thank you for watching this episode of Omni Athlete. Hey, what is up, guys? Thank you for watching another episode of Omni Athlete. Please go like and subscribe to our podcast. That is our goal right now, is just to build this community as big as we possibly can, and we need your help to do it. So like and subscribe, share our content, guys. If this content adds any value to your world, that helps you perform, connect, go deeper, go wider, whatever it is that it does for you, if it provides value, all we ask is that you share our content and help grow this community. We can't accomplish our goal of elevating global consciousness through sport without you. You are an integral part of this mission and this purpose, and we need your help. So please go like, subscribe, and share our content, and continue to help us build and grow this community that is truly motivated to not just elevate consciousness, but elevate and shift the very culture of sport, so that we can truly experience the athletic experience in a brand new and energizing way for so many people, guys. So thank you, and please like and subscribe. Until next time.